All right, we're at 3 after, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. All right, hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this evening for the Minneapolis Ward 3 Virtual Candidate Forum hosted by Make Homes Happen. We're glad to have you all with us this evening. My name is Eric Hauge. I'm the Executive Director at Homeline, which is a Make Homes Happen member, and I'll be the MC and moderator this evening. Homeline is a nonprofit statewide tenant advocacy organization that provides legal advice to renters. Just a few housekeeping items before we begin. We're using the Zoom webinar systems, which means you can see us and hear us, but we can't see or hear you. We are recording this webinar and we'll share it on the Make Homes Happen Facebook page by the end of the month. Audience members, please use the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to type in any questions you have for the candidates. They'll be able to answer your questions directly in a bit. Finally, for candidates who would like to do so, I invite you at this time to share your website, contact page, or email address in the chat in case voters want to follow up with any additional questions. As you all know, we have an important election coming up on November 2nd in less than 2 months. All 13 city council member positions in Minneapolis and the Minneapolis mayor are up for election this year, as are park board members and 2 board of estimate and taxation members. To see exactly who will be on your ballot, visit the Secretary of State's website on September 17th or later. For information about when, where, and how to vote, visit votes.minneapolis.gov. And Julia, who's managing our tech tonight, is going to share those links in the chat as well. Additionally, Minneapolis has ranked choice voting elections. So this November, you'll have the power to rank your first, second, and third choice candidates on your ballot. If your first choice does not continue in the instant runoff, your vote goes to your second choice. And if your second choice does not continue, your vote goes to your third choice. You should rank as many candidates as you prefer, up to 3. When you listen to the candidates tonight, consider not just your first choice, but also your second or third. And before we hear from candidates, I want to tell you a little bit very quickly about Make Homes Happen. We're a coalition of community-based groups and organizations that advocate for affordable housing development, preservation, and tenant rights in Minneapolis. In 2017, we helped successfully push for a $40 million investment in the Minneapolis Affordable Housing Trust Fund. Yet even then, the housing needs of our community far outweigh the dollars spent. Of course, the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated what was already a housing crisis, and we know housing is a critical issue for our city. City leaders have significant influence on the policies, programs, and funding choices that impact our community. And so that's why our coalition is hosting this forum tonight. In order to ensure the fairness of our election series, Make Homes Happen used a uniform process in communicating with candidates. We approached each candidate and invited them to participate in a Zoom interview about housing. The interview included 3 questions, and candidates had 2 minutes to respond to each question. We recorded candidates' answers and will play them back for you now as opening statements for this event. Note that we did not edit the content of candidates' responses, but we did cut each answer off at 2 minutes. Anything that was said after 2 minutes will not be shared here today. This was done to ensure standardization across the interviews that we conducted. So let's get ready to hear from the candidates. Julia is going to go ahead and play the recorded Zoom interviews for us. And we will start with Steve Fletcher in alphabetical order by last name.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
I do believe we're on the right track on affordable housing in a number of ways, and we also have a lot farther to go. So the things that we're doing that I think are the right things are, first of all, building a lot more housing of all types, and especially affordable housing, and especially deeply affordable housing. And we've dramatically increased the quantity of new affordable housing units that we're producing each year. That's a really good thing. And that's one of the key goals that we needed to establish. The second thing that we needed to do was to lower the barriers to getting into housing. And we've passed renter protections that limit lookbacks and prevent the use of credit scores, for example, to make it easier for people to qualify for housing and to get into housing. And then we're working on anti-displacement work to make it easier for people to stay in their homes. And I think that that's really the important area for us to continue to dig in on. At the same time, we've been expanding our work in figuring out where are the gaps in our housing system? Who are the people who are not succeeding in housing who need additional supports, and what kinds of supportive housing and low barrier housing do we need to create to address especially the crisis of unsheltered homelessness? And I think that we are making some progress, doing a lot of learning, and now need to really double and triple and quadruple down on some of the strategies that we're seeing that are starting to work, like Avivo Village and others, where we've found low barrier options that are helping people transition from unsheltered homelessness into more stable housing situations and address many of their health needs. So there's quite a lot that I think we're doing right. There's certainly things that I think we need to be doing more of. And I'm proud of a lot of the progress we've made, including things like inclusionary zoning, which I supported, and TOPA, which I'm a co-author of, that I'm hoping will still pass this year or queue up for passing next year.
Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
So a couple of the things that we didn't make progress on, or we didn't make as much progress on as I would have liked to, the most important one is to create new public housing and to really put an investment in public housing on the table in a meaningful way, so that that's a part of how we're thinking about the housing options that we build. I understand the very good reasons for trying to subsidize private development of affordable housing, because we can leverage a lot of additional outside investment and get more housing built than we might be able to if we're fully funding the building of public housing. But I think we miss out on something when we stop building public housing that's fully public and fully accountable for the public goals that we're investing in them. So I'm hoping that we can get back onto an investment footing to build more public housing into our system. I also think we need to do more to track metrics on affordable housing. We've always gotten somewhat vague answers about the way we track especially market rate housing, about whether it has stayed affordable. So really understanding our NOAA properties at a much better level, understanding what housing might be taken out of the market, like what we discovered was happening with Airbnb, which is why I passed new regulations on that. I think we could do a lot more to sort of really understand our housing market and require a little bit of reporting in exchange for a rental license that can allow us to have a better insight into what our housing stock is actually doing. And then finally, I think that we have an opportunity to increase ownership opportunities. Obviously, I'm a co-author on TOPA because I support ownership opportunities that way. I'm also hoping we're going to get a land trust condo deal done, which would be kind of an innovative way to get multifamily housing built that's indexed to affordability. But I really do think we need to think of more ways for people who do want to own their homes to be able to do that.
What are the practical skills and/or lived experience that you would bring to your role as a city council member that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
So first of all, it's significant that I'm one of 2 renters on the Council of 13, and that experience of being a renter, of negotiating with a landlord, of wondering if I'll get my security deposit back is fresh and meaningful, and is something that is not just an abstract idea or something that I remember from 20 years ago when I'm talking to tenants about those experiences. Also, it's worth noting, I've been a community organizer working on housing issues going a lot farther back than when I got on the city council. And so when I was at Neighborhoods Organizing for Change and at Acorn before that, I worked on housing issues. I worked on foreclosure prevention issues, tenant advocacy work. And so this is something I've been doing for a long, long time. I have seen people through a whole variety of situations around housing and watched what housing means to people, what it means to really help people stay in their homes, what it means to help people live in dignity. And being in those fights, being in a lot of different situations where we've had to advocate to prevent foreclosures, to get people access to repairs that they needed on their homes, to prevent evictions, is something that will always stay with me. That's experience that I carry into the city council. And also just a lot of experience getting out and talking to people, especially while they're in a state of crisis or need, and being able to really get to solutions is something that I bring to this, that I've been proud to bring to this, and it's something that has been beneficial in this first term and that I would continue to bring to the council.
All right. Thank you, Julia, for playing the video, and thank you, video version of Steve. And next, we are going to hear the recorded statements of candidate Hope Hennessey.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
Well, hello, everyone. Yes, I'm Hope Hennessey, and I'm so excited to be a candidate representing Ward 3 for Minneapolis City Council this year. I just wanted to take a moment to thank the Make Homes Happen Coalition for putting together this forum and inviting us to be a part of it. This was not a small task, and the dedication of these community members honestly inspires me. Something I love about Minneapolis is the incredible diverse community programs that we have here that come together because people actually care about making affordable housing happen. And we all want to spend our weeknights discussing strategies and policies. And I'm grateful to be here. So do I believe the city is heading in the right direction in regards to affordable housing? I don't think we're in a good place right now. And I definitely think that there is just so much more that we can be doing. Currently, there's no legislature protecting tenants from landlords increasing rent to whatever they'd like. Over the last year, we watched the median monthly income rent increase 2.3% to $1,495. And the median rent for a 2-bedroom increased to 8.2% to $1,812. This is from NPR. I don't think this is affordable for a lot of our community members. Recently, the City Council and Mayor vetoed the Renter Stabilization Charter Amendment from going on the ballot this November, which they say is in favor of putting their own policy and plan in place. So tonight, I'm really excited to share with you some of the policies that I think Minneapolis desperately needs. A big part of my platform is putting people over profit, and I want to see Minneapolis heading in a positive direction on affordable housing. Thank you.
Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
Well, I'll start with eviction ordinances. So many of our community members have faced the toughest year and a half of their lives during this pandemic. And while there's been federal and state legislature, Minneapolis needs its own policies in place. So a pre-eviction notification should be standard practice. This gives renters up to 60 days or more to respond before an eviction violates them. Unfortunately, as some people have experienced, once that eviction is on their record, even if it doesn't go through, it will still haunt them for years and inhibit them from accessing adequate housing. Most landlords openly state that they won't work with anyone who has an eviction on their record. We also need to implement just cause eviction protection ordinance. Many of our community members face discrimination with few resources to fight the termination of leases, and this would provide extra protection for being evicted for no reason. I would also like to explore vacancy control. This is a policy that we could implement to keep landlords from increasing rents above a certain percentage when one tenant moves out. This would eliminate high rental rate increases in between leases. Minneapolis also severely underfunds city inspections of units, which just allows inadequate, unacceptable housing conditions to continue. And I'd like to increase funding in this department. Another exciting program that I want to highlight is TOPA, or the Tenant Opportunity to Purchase Act. This act allows renters the first chance to purchase their residence if the owner is hoping to sell. they can even come together collectively to build a co-op. And what's amazing about this program is it's not just the right to purchase, it also offers assistance in the technical things like loan applications, legal documents, and with the aid of a housing nonprofit. This would be such an incredible asset for underrepresented members of our community that don't have access to these resources. This is something that is already in the.
What are the practical skills and/or lived experience that you would bring to your role as a city council member that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
Well, I'm a renter myself here in Minneapolis. So is my sister and my parents. I know the struggle of finding affordable housing in Minneapolis on a lower income. I mean, I've had wonderful, helpful landlords, but I've also had to move 16 times in my life due to pest infestations, lack of hot water, wild rent increases, and safety concerns. I actually just went through the process of finding a new apartment, and I know how challenging the current climate is to move somewhere that fits into your budget. So I'm very motivated to work on this issue because I believe everyone deserves a home and no one should have to go through the stress of not being able to afford one. The practical skills that I bring to the table come with my experience of over 10 years of working in operations, management, and fund development. I'm excellent with budgets, and allocating funds to affordable housing programs will be one of my top priorities if I were to be elected to the Minneapolis City Council. Thank you.
All right, thanks again, Julia, and thank you, recorded version of Hope. And lastly, we're going to get to the, we will hear the recorded statements of Michael Rainville.
Affordable housing has been a priority in the last 4 years, and many policies and programs were introduced to address the housing needs of the community, some of which have passed and some are currently under discussion. Do you believe that the city is headed in the right direction when it comes to affordable housing policies? Please explain your answer.
Yes, I do believe the city's headed in the right direction. And the biggest reason is we're admitting and recognizing that we do have a crisis in affordable housing. If you want to solve any problem, first you have to admit you have a problem, and we have a problem here in Minneapolis. We need to increase the role of city government in developing housing. I'm especially concerned about single-family homes, or excuse me, family homes for families. Regarding single-family homes, I'm concerned that a lot of that is being scooped up by corporates. Big national corporations are buying single-family homes, especially in North Minneapolis, dooming them to perpetual rental and raising those rents. I think that home ownership should be looked into more. If someone wants to own a home, the city should be helping more doing that. Things like housing trusts and cooperative ownership is great. I'm also concerned that about 90% of the housing that has been built in the city has been single room, single bedrooms. And I'm sorry, I'm so damn nervous here. Never run for office before. But I see that crisis for families. If you have a couple of kids, we're not building housing for you. So families are being left out. I'm really concerned about that. And I hope to help solve that problem when I'm elected to the city council.
Are there any housing policies that you think the city is currently overlooking and should be discussed? Please be specific in what policies or tools you would want to make sure are brought to the table.
Some of the policies that I think the city needs to continue on and increase is, again, building homes for families, that we're just not building enough. We have to recognize that there are people with 2, 3 children that need help, or multi-generational members of their household. We need more bedrooms being built. That's a big policy. Also, I've had experience with the Housing Land Trust with Jeff Washburn. I think that we should support him at a much higher level in his effort. The Housing Land Trusts really are doing great things. I looked at Burlington, Vermont. They have a great program there. And if they can do it in Burlington, we can do it here in Minneapolis. So then the final policy really is to get over to the state and convince them to increase our bonding authority for affordable housing. Right now it's at $50 million. That should be $250 million. So we have to partner with the state, get them more help. We have to have a policy to get the county. Whether we're a renter or a homeowner, we pay a lot of tax dollars to the county, and housing should be a much bigger part of their budgets. And then of course there's a federal government. We need to speak with our congressional leaders as well as our senators and get more affordable housing dollars from the federal government. They need to understand the crisis that's the city of Minneapolis is in and the leadership that Minneapolis shows in providing affordable housing.
What are the practical skills and/or lived experience that you would bring to your role as a city council member that could be used to help address the city's affordable housing needs?
I have great practical skills, great lived skills. So I have degrees from the University of St. Thomas in marketing, Notre Dame University. I have a certification in nonprofit association management. And for 35 years, I worked for the Minneapolis Convention and Visitors Association, creating the economic jobs engine that is downtown Minneapolis. There is a tremendous amount of jobs in the hospitality industry in Minneapolis, 36,000 to be exact. They're great entry-level jobs, and you can be promoted as much as your ambition takes you. In addition, I have served for 35 years on the board of the St. Anthony West neighborhood. During that time, I got to meet Jeff Washburn. We're doing a program with them. I got involved early on with NRP dollars to help strengthen both rental and home ownership properties in Minneapolis. And all through my professional and volunteer life in St. Anthony West, things like developing the Pierre Bonner Library, the Ritz Theater, the parks along the river. You do that with many forms of government and many people at the table, even people who disagree with what you're doing, but you have to listen to those who disagree. You have to understand their problems, solve their problems, move forward. I've done that on many projects, and especially bringing different levels of government to help fund the projects over here in Northeast Minneapolis. So I have the skills needed. I have the desire to serve. I look forward to being the 3rd Ward City Council member.
All right. Again, thank you, Julia, for running the videos, and thanks to recorded version of Michael. Now we're going to get to the real live versions of our candidates. So again, thank you all candidates for being here tonight and introducing yourselves to us through the video questionnaire. We're going to move on to the next phase of the event, where we're going to hear directly from you all the candidates, in response to audience questions. If you're joining us today, please use the Q&A function on Zoom to ask any sort of housing related question you have for candidates. The Q&A box is just down there at the bottom on your Zoom window, and that'll submit it in through, and we'll be able to ask them. Make Homes Happen has also prepared a few questions to get us started, but we'd love to have some audience participation with questions. Again, to be fair, we're going to rotate which candidate answers first. And again, candidates, you will each have 2 minutes to respond to the question. We're going to time you, and then I'll be muting you once your time is at 2 minutes. So since Steve went first on the videos, we're going to start with Hope Hennessey for our first question. Not seeing any submitted by the audience yet, so we're going to jump to some that we prepared in advance. So Hope, here's the first question. Can you just describe one of the most effective measures that the city of Minneapolis could use to support and preserve naturally occurring affordable housing in the market?
All right. Well, I think that there are a lot of great programs in place. I know that we have an excellent organization, EON, that provides and takes like sustainable buildings that they can save and create into affordable housing. There's also grant options from the local housing incentives account that focus on affordable housing. We could apply for more of those. That's, for instance, how the Bloom Lake Flats were able to be sustained here in Minneapolis. So I think the programs are out there, and I think as community members that care, as potentially future city council members, we should continue to like look for these grants and find ways to like keep these buildings maintained. I had to go first. Sorry. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Hope. Michael, you're next. Would you like me to repeat it or are you good to go?
No, I'm good, Eric. Thank you. So I think it all starts with keeping properties in good shape. Hope had mentioned a little bit earlier about the inspections department needs to be beefed up, and I agree with that. There's nothing worse than seeing a rundown building or living in a rundown building. And let's keep these houses in good shape, the apartment buildings. The next would be to educate the opportunities to purchase these. I think the ordinance being discussed where renters have the opportunity to purchase is fantastic. We should look forward and support that 100%. So the education component, and then of course the funding. There just has to be the funding to move these apartment buildings to save them from being purchased and then having the rents increase. That's just a disgrace. I have several friends in my neighborhood living in great little duplexes, and the duplex gets sold, also the rent goes up $400, $500, and they're forced out. Tremendous fans and all have to live in the suburbs. So I've seen that personally, the effects of what happens. And it's all about thinking this through, getting the funding to help save these homes.
All right. Thank you, Michael. And Steve, you're next. Happy to repeat the question or?
Nope, I think I got it. I think preserving NOAA properties is one of the most important things we can do. This week, we're actually voting to approve bonding in support of the new owners of Stonehouse Square Apartments over in Sheridan, which is one of the victories in NOAA preservation in Ward 3 this term. And I'm really excited that we've been able to put the resources into that. We need to do a lot more. We need to get more NOAA funding in. And TOPA really is the mechanism to do that. We got lucky with Stonehouse Square that the owners there selected an affordable preservation buyer. They had multiple offers. They didn't have to do that. We'd like to create the context where the residents could have banded together and purchased the building cooperatively, or if they didn't, where the city could have purchased it and worked with a nonprofit to hold it and sustain it as affordable. So we could have made sure that a preservation buyer got access to that housing unit. So I think we're putting good policies in place. TOPA really is the priority on that. I think that's the most important mechanism to make sure that we can do some of the great pilots that we've done to purchase distressed properties and keep tenants in their homes, lead us to know that this can work. And so I'm excited to move that forward. And that's why I signed on as a co-author.
All right, thank you. We do have an audience question that's come in, so we'll jump to that next. And Michael, you'll be first with this question. How much public housing should Minneapolis add every year? And how should it be funded?
Well, I think public housing, there's a scattered site housing right down the street, and the neighborhood I live in has 4 different high-rise apartments, and they're all great tenants. It works out so well in the neighborhood. But for some reason, we lost our way on funding that as a community. That there was a halt on that. We need to get back to it. But as you know, the root of all evil is money. And as a city, we can't do that alone. That's where we need the help from the county, from the state, and from the federal government. In the infrastructure package now being discussed in Congress, there's $200 billion dedicated to housing. We need to get that and secure that public housing and start rebuilding, start up our building program for public housing.
Thank you. And Steve, you're next on this question.
Sure. So, it's not a mystery how we ended up underfunding public housing. Under the Reagan administration, the federal government massively defunded its public housing program. And we've just never, ever recovered at the federal level. Just orders of magnitude of funding got cut. And the way that cities have dealt with it and the way that we have dealt with it has been to try to leverage private dollars and focus more on private market where we can subsidize affordable housing. And I think it really is time for us to make sure that we are adding public housing as a part of our portfolio again. And right now, the right answer to how much public housing should we be adding is how much public housing does MPHA have an appetite to build and a plan to build? We should be trying to raise the money to support that. So that was the question that I put to MPHA last year in the budget process. And as we looked at that, I, really was hoping to hear a little higher number, frankly. But for this year, they were willing to do a sort of 25 building pilot around converting some scattered site buildings that needed to be converted to needed to be upgraded to convert them into triplexes and get more housing units out of them. I think that's an extremely positive thing, and I'm excited to support more of that. But that really is, right now, I think if we could get into the hundreds of units per year for a while, I think that would be an investment that would get us caught up and is something that we should absolutely be trying to do.
Thank you, Steve. And next we have Hope on this question.
Hi, thank you. Yes, we definitely need to fund public housing. That needs to be a huge priority. One way we can go about this is going through grants and the Affordable Housing Trust Fund program. Again, like both of you guys mentioned, there are federal grants available, and this is also something that can provide gap financing for affordable and mixed income rental housing. So I think that's something that we need to continue pursuing in order to get that funding to create more homes and keep them affordable. Thanks.
Thank you, Hope. Got to give you all props on your time management skills here. We have another couple questions from the audience, so thanks for submitting, folks. Again, you can hit the Q&A button at the bottom of Zoom to send in your question. So we'll go to the next audience question, and Steve, you're up first on this one. What are your thoughts on the rent control? What are your thoughts on rent control in general, and your stance on the proposed rent control ballot measure? What other avenues would you pursue to keep rent affordable across the city?
Thanks for that question. Yeah, this is a really important topic, and I'm very supportive of an ordinance to create rent stabilization in our city, and I'm very supportive of the ballot measure that will give us the opportunity to do that next term. I think it's very important that we stabilize rents. I know what it's like to get to that rent renewal period and be wondering, is my landlord gonna jack my rents up? Am I gonna have to look for new housing? And we need to take that anxiety away from people. We need to let everybody who lives in their home get to really treat it like a home and feel like part of their community and like they're not gonna get displaced. And so that's very important. We know that in general, rents tend to only go up 1% to 2% a year citywide. So I support something in the range of 3% as a stabilization cap. And I think that we need to really keep the policy as simple as possible. I don't want to create a rent control board with a lot of complicated variance mechanisms. I want to create something that is straightforward and simple, that everybody can comply with, and that can let every renter in the city feel confident that if they want to stay in their home next year, they'll be able to stay in their home next year. So I hope everybody votes yes on question 3. I think it's very important that we empower the city to make that kind of policy change. And then I really hope that the council, and I'll certainly be part of, if selected for a second term, I'll be part of crafting that policy and making sure that we get rent stabilization done.
All right, thank you, Steve. And next on this question is Hope.
Thank you. Yes, I was so excited to see that our current council and mayor was able to come to a conclusion to put that rent stabilization policy on our ballot. I think that's incredibly important. I definitely want to see these policies come into place, and I know I'm going to vote yes for that. I agree that we need to have a consumer price index percentage based for rent increases, limited annual increases that way. As I mentioned before, I also think vacancy control is important, so we don't see landlords pushing current tenants out just so they can jack up those rental prices to the next tenant. Inclusionary zoning is something that's incredibly important too. So as we see these large new developments come up, let's incentivize those developing companies to make sure that some of their units are set aside for affordable housing. While we're at it, we can also ask for the main ground floor to also be available for small businesses, and that's another wonderful opportunity there. And also, it's not, we want to create a system that works for landlords and our tenants, so there are extra policies that we can put in place, so there's a fair return, and we can also make sure that landlords can apply to increase if they're doing different things to their unit to make sure that they're like improving it. You know, we don't want to see them go underwater on these units and have them go into bad conditions. So just want to ensure that everyone understands that, you know, we're not pushing for this like strict hard rent control policy. We're looking for rent stabilization across the city of Minneapolis. And I think that we can really work together to make a fair plan for tenants and landlords alike and investors. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Hope. And lastly on this question is Michael.
Thank you, Eric. So I had the opportunity to sit on a session, Neighbors for More Neighbors. It was a professor from UCLA, and they talked about rent control and stabilization. And they really struck a chord that I agree with 100%, that housing should be viewed as a utility. It's just like your water, your electricity, your gas, and we regulate those utilities. So regulating rent is a really good idea. And I think that with 60% of the population of Minneapolis being renters, that issue will pass. The nuance of it all is going to be how do we get enough money, as Hope said, so that these units can stay in repair and that they're not infested. So how do we manage that? What is the level? What happens when property taxes have to be raised? How does the landlord become whole with that? So other cities have not done that successfully. I'm so proud of the city that I was born and raised in, and I think we're smart enough to overcome those. So I look forward to those really great discussions about how we can help people with their lives to have a very secure home and keep those rents manageable. At the same time, making sure the landlords have enough money to keep the repairs going.
All right, thank you, Michael. Looks like we have another audience participation question. So thanks, audience members, for sending these in. This next one, we're going to start with Hope. And here's the question. Since we are dealing with a supply issue in housing, how does building more single-family homes help alleviate supply issues?
Well, I do think we need to look at urban planning and create density in our city. You know, we only have so much space to work with. So I do think we have to look at it in a broad sense of how can we expand not just single family homes. Something that passed recently in the last couple of years is actually a zoning issue allowing what was once considered residential single family homes to become duplexes or triplexes. And I actually think that that's a great policy, so that although you can move away from maybe apartment living, have the chance to buy your own home, you also can share it with maybe another family and share that yard and that space. And I think that that's something that we have to really work towards in Minneapolis if we want to create an opportunity for everyone to become homeowners that way. So yes, thank you.
Thank you, Hope. And next on this one is Michael.
Eric, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes. Since we're dealing with a supply issue in housing, how does building more single-family homes help alleviate supply issues?
Well, it helps. So this question isn't real clear because we have a supply issue in single-family homes and we have a supply issue in apartments. And I'm going to speak from experience here because in my neighborhood, they're tearing down single-family homes and building up apartments. We have all these single-family homes, especially in North Minneapolis, that are being converted from home ownership into rental properties by huge multinationals. So instead of paying $700 to $900 home payment, you're paying a rental payment of $1,100 to $1,400. So that single-family home is a crisis in itself, as is the crisis for apartment buildings. So we have to build both, and we have to work with the Met Council to get the rail line, the bottom line built out, so we have more opportunity, not only in Minneapolis to build apartments, but also in the suburbs. That's, Minneapolis is not an island for housing. We're a metropolitan area, and we need to build everywhere in the metropolitan area. That's the beauty of these rail lines. Look at the magic, and I do mean magic, that happened along the Hiawatha line and the St. Paul line. Look at all the housing that was built there. That's a really smart way to increase our housing. Let's finish that South Rail line. Let's get the bottom line built.
All right, thank you, Michael. And last on this question is Steve.
Thank you. Well, the honest truth is that it doesn't. help alleviate supply issues. That in fact, one of the tragedies of urban planning is that we created an extremely inefficient form of housing that became sort of accepted as the norm that everybody should accept, and it is still the dominant form of housing in our city. And we have an obligation both for the climate and also to meet the need for housing in our city, to use our space more efficiently, to let more people live close to the river, let more people live close to jobs, let more people live close to activities and schools. And in order to do that, we should be focusing our efforts on denser forms of housing as we think about our role as a city in a metro region. Our Minneapolis Homes program is a great example. Now that we have the opportunity to build triplexes, we're starting to shift even our thinking on that. Minneapolis Homes typically produces about 40 ownership units a year. We have the opportunity to double or triple that if we start looking at duplexes and triplexes, organizing that housing more as townhomes or other kinds of potential ownership units, rather than sticking rigidly to that single family model. So I think we have to think more creatively about what kind of housing is a home. We have to think more creatively about what kind of housing is going to actually meet people's needs. The last census data shows that we almost succeeded with all the growth that we achieved over the last 10 years in housing stock. We almost succeeded in growing our housing stock as fast as our population grew, but not quite. We actually still lost ground even with everything we've been doing. So I think it's very important that we continue to focus on dense construction and really thinking about how can we use the land in the best way for the community and in the best way to invite people in and make sure everyone has a home.
All right, thank you, Steve. We're about 45 minutes in, which is approximately the halfway point if we do go till 8:30, which we set aside till. Not seeing any questions in the queue right now, but just reminding attendees, go ahead and send them in if you have more. I'm going to jump over to some of the pre-prepared questions, and Michael will be going first on this one now. So Michael, what will you do as council member to ensure the city has adequate funding and policies for the production of new affordable and accessible housing stock?
So thank you, Eric, for the question. And I'm going to give you the answer that I will repeat time and time again. The city needs to outreach. I hope to be on the intergovernmental relations committee. We have to reach out to the county, the state, the federal governments who have a much higher capability of providing housing dollars. We as a city are doing a good job. We certainly could do more. Part of that is in growing our tax base. There's a real worry. 40% of our tax dollars come from downtown. That's in danger right now. I don't know if that's going to happen in the future with all the empty spaces. So we're going to have to rely on the Met Council, the county, the state. Those are the agencies that we need to have a relationship with as a city to help us with our housing. And I have the ability to form those relationships. All the skills of my life have allowed me to succeed by bringing in those dollars to get projects done. I can do that.
All right, thank you, Michael. And next up is Steve.
Thank you. So, of course, we need every unit of government to come in, but we have to really think about what are the things that we have the power to do. We can't wait for Republicans in the Senate to save us. We actually are going to have to build the housing that we need here in the city. And I think it's very important that we just name it as a priority. And in fact, we really have this term. I think we could even do more. But making sure we've put more money than ever before into affordable housing. And that commitment, that investment has prompted our partners to step up as well. But in a lot of ways, we really have to walk the walk and make sure the county sees us, when we say, look, we're throwing $15 million into the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and we're making these investments in homeless outreach and all these other things. That's been a powerful thing at the table. And we've ended up collectively making more than a $55 million investment in our attempts to alleviate unsheltered homelessness and the new shelters that we're in the process of creating. And that's come from a combination of state, county, and city. But we have to make it a priority. It has to be something that we just, that's the thing that we won't let go in the budget as we're looking at all the other priorities. And we can continue to do more and more. I think we should use our bonding authority with MPHA that gives us a separate bonding line and lets us get more into and a separate levy line that lets us treat MPHA as something that we need to invest in. I think it would be worth it for us as a city to come together and say we are going to invest collectively in public housing in a significant way, and that's something that we want to come together and do. So I think it really is just budgets are a statement of priorities, and that's something that we've shown and that we need to continue to show even stronger.
Thank you, Steve. And lastly, on this question, we have Hope.
Thank you. Yes. Well, as it's been stated, I think just securing budget money for affordable housing is so important. Continually funding our 40 affordable housing incentive. I know there was 40 million put aside for this, an additional 31 million proposed, which I completely agree with. I think that's so necessary. Also, as we see these new developments come up, continue to incentivize these developers to set aside some of their units to remain affordable. We also can look at different opportunities to provide incentives through reduction of property taxes and things like that. I'm excited to explore more policies that can help ensure that we're doing what we are doing and also more. We can also partner with some of the organizations that already are in place, maybe outside of our government, but in the city of Minneapolis that are already building these affordable housing units. And I think that we should continue to work with them, see how we can help fund them, or work with these grant programs to ensure that they have funding as well, because there is a lot of federal money out there for this program too, outside of our own taxpayer dollars. So thank you.
Thank you, Hope. All right, we're going to transition to a question from an attendee. And Steve will go first on this one. Transportation is also an important part of housing as well. Can the candidates talk a bit about how they think Minneapolis should reorient the transportation system to account for more density in housing?
Absolutely. I love talking about this. I think that we have to build for transit, and we have to build for renters to feel encouraged to use transit and to walk and bike and get around in all the different ways that you can get around in our city, and to feel like they can access most of the things that they want to do by those modes. So the first thing is we need to add more efficient buses. It has to be easier to get places and faster to get places. And the expansions of the bus rapid transit system that we're contemplating on Central, the E-line that'll go through downtown and Marcy Holmes are all really exciting additions to the system. We also need to connect neighborhoods. I'm really excited. I started advocating very early on, anytime I had a chance to talk to Metro Transit planners, as we were talking about where to put bus stops, and they consult with us and through Public Works. We talked about creating a connection between downtown neighborhoods, because everything runs on the hub and spoke, and it's actually very inefficient to just get like from the Mill District to the North Loop. And this month they actually rerouted the number 3 line so that it runs straight up Washington Avenue. It's now the Washington Avenue bus, and anybody can jump on a high frequency line and get from the North Loop to the Mill District. And that took partnership with another agency. We don't control transit, but we need to be talking to our partners about how they can serve our neighborhoods and how they can connect our neighborhoods. And then also talking to developers and businesses about, as they're bringing in retail, the question I've challenged everybody to answer when they're talking about their ground floor retail in their buildings is, what do people currently drive out of the neighborhood to get? And can you bring that to this neighborhood, whatever the thing is? So in one neighborhood, that might be a nail salon, in one neighborhood, that might be a hardware store, but figure out what's making people feel like they have to have a car, and figure out how to bring it into a walkable neighborhood.
Right, thank you, Steve. And next up is Hope.
Thank you. Yes, well, it's a great question because transportation is such an integral part of this conversation. So I do think we need to expand our transportation budget through a lot of means, through additional lines, but also through additional hours of our public transportation. Right now, we see a lot of lines that close off at a certain time that's maybe more geared to traditional work hours. But oftentimes the people that need public transportation the most are working second or even overnight shifts, and they need to have access to that as well. In tandem with this, I think we should also increase some of our public safety measures, as you might have to transfer to a different line or walk a bit. That can be a deterrent for using public transportation, which I would like to see us work on a policy to help make people feel more safe in our city, of course, it's a big conversation. But for instance, in the North Loop, you know, there is the new like small housing community that's been being built, but the only real grocery store in the North Loop is Whole Foods, which is not exactly the most affordable place. So as we talk about these measures, I do think we need direct lines that get people, and as Steve mentioned as well, that get people to the places that they need to go. What in your neighborhood needs to be developed so that you can walk, so you can get rid of your car, so you can live in a highly dense neighborhood without having to travel all over the city to get that one item. So thank you. Yeah, I think that it's a conversation that needs to happen as well with public housing. So thanks.
Thank you, Hope. And next up is Michael.
I agree with everything that was said, except the fact that we're not getting the job done with the Met Council. They control the transit, not the city of Minneapolis. The example that I just shudder at is all this great housing that was built on Marshall Northeast here. We were promised by the city officials, city elected officials, that they would get the Met Council to institute a bus route down Marshall, to reinstitute it. We had one, they took it away, and a cost saving, it hasn't been replaced. So all those apartments on Marshall, which again, density, there's a library there, there's the parks, there's so many good reasons, but they don't have the transit. That does not make them the desirable housing that it should be. And then secondly, I just want to add that we have to be real and understand that there's always going to be cars. People are going to need cars to go and do, people with children, elderly people, cars, whether they're electric or nitrogen or natural gas, they're not going to be the carbon burning cars anymore. You know, we have a great president, great leadership at that level to convert into electric vehicles. But cars are a reality. So we can't count on public transportation for everything, especially with children. And the last survey, Hope, I'll give you credit for touching on public safety. 73% of the people who took the survey on public transportation are afraid. They're afraid. So, you know, the Met Council has to really, we have to have a deeper relationship with them on these bus routes. Thank
you, Michael. All right, we got another question, but I'm gonna jump to one that I had lined up here first, and that is about kind of partnerships. Let's see here. Hope is gonna go first on this one. Can you describe your direct experience establishing and maintaining varied or complex partnerships, and how you'll use this experience as a city council member to, you know, cultivate those types of constructive and effective working relationships with city folks?
Sure, of course. Yes, that's a great question. Personally, I've served on several boards, and I've also worked as managing a board of directors as well. So I think that's important that you keep those open forms of communication present. I think we have so many opportunities for digital communication at our fingertips that instead of having to try to get everyone together twice a month, you know, we can do it virtually from the comfort of our own homes. So I'm definitely open to keeping those lines open. And I do think that a committee-based approach is so important when it comes to these topics. I want to hear from the grassroots organizations that have spent and devoted so much time to uncovering these issues. I want to invite the experts from Cura in to talk more about the plan that they spent so much time working on and uncovering the inconsistencies in our city. So I do think it's important to bring those groups together. I think open communication and transparency is important in that regard. Maybe using alternative forms of communication, text groups, Slack, things like that. I think we have a lot of options to continually keep this conversation going without having to try to have, you know, just one board meeting a month, which I think regresses our progressive policies. That's why things maybe don't get done as fast as they could. So I'm open to putting that together. And I feel good about my ability to manage a board and a committee as well. So thank you.
All right, thank you, Hope, for that answer. And next up we have Michael.
Eric, could you restate the question, please?
Sure, yes. Can you describe your direct experience establishing and maintaining varied and complex partnerships, and how will you use this experience as a city council member to cultivate constructive and effective working relationships with folks in the city?
Absolutely. So I would love to any of the viewers that are watching tonight or will in the future contact me, and I'll take on a walking tour of what I've done in Lower Northeast here, whether it's helping the Arts District by establishing the Ritz Theater, a wonderful performing arts venue, the Pierre Bottineau Library, or the parkland. You know, the parkland, the BF Nelson site was incredibly complex. We had to get I invited the EPA in to come in and test the soil. We had the National Park Service helping us. We had the state DNR helping build a river overlook, a beautiful overlook on the East Channel between Northeast and Nicollet Island. And to do all of that, it took so many different government agencies. The bike lanes on Marshall Street, there's wonderful bike lanes from East Centerpin down to Broadway through the St. Anthony West neighborhood. I did that as president. And there were so many people that had different ideas on how to do it. There were disagreements, but I listened to those who did not agree. I brought them to the table and I got that job done. It's all about partnerships. I did that as a volunteer. As a professional, I worked for the Minneapolis Convention and Visitors Association in their partnership department. And I was the top producer year after year after year because I know how to listen. I know how to bring people to the table that don't agree with everything. But at the end of the day, we get the job done. I've done it time and time again in my neighborhood.
All right, thank you, Michael. And last up on this question is Steve.
Thanks for this question. It's very important. And I've been known my whole career as a coalition builder. That's one of the defining things about my community organizing work. You know, when I was at NOC, we were trying to draw attention to the foreclosure crisis. And we recognized connections between the damage that the foreclosure crisis was causing and to homeowners who are being evicted, and also to schools and to the children that they teach who were being displaced. And we were able to pull together a coalition as we identified the cost to the Minneapolis public schools of that crisis. That included parent organizing groups, that included housing organizing groups, that included labor unions, that included a whole bunch of people, and actually get some policy change that kept some people in their homes. It was an important part of a bigger victory in that organizing movement. And then on the council, we've done it again and again and again. Just about every major legislative accomplishment I've achieved has been done with coalitions. When we worked on freelance wage theft, that was supported by a wide array of workers, from labor unions, from stagehands to SWAP of the sex workers, to technology consultants, to artists. And we had everybody at the table, and that was what made that powerful. And it made the policy better, by the way, when you're listening to everybody and you hear the ways that different components of the policy are going to land differently with people. Our data privacy work included technologists and public safety advocates and race equity advocates who approached surveillance from a variety of different perspectives, and bringing those together got us to a policy that did the most good for the most people. So this is something I'm good at. It's something I've demonstrated. It's something I look forward to keeping doing as a really central and defining part of how I govern and how I lead.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Steve. We're going to jump back to some audience questions here. And this audience member wants to thank you for all your thoughtful responses. I agree. Appreciate your participation tonight. Do you have, and sorry, this is going to Michael first. Do you have one specific housing related policy you look forward to implementing right away at the start or the continuation of your term?
Yeah, I would definitely look forward to rent stabilization and how you can thread the needle on that between, again, I go back to Hope's remark that you have to keep these buildings up. You have to have enough money coming in to keep the buildings up. You have to be really sensitive to these gigantic increases where I've lost friends in my neighborhood, very sympathetic to that. And then also what happens when property taxes go up, when there's a big repair job on the roof or utilities. That will be a defining moment of my term and of the cities. And I really look forward to that difficult discussion. And again, listening to landlords who aren't necessarily going to agree, listening to renters advocates who probably won't agree with the final product, but getting the job done and doing it for the good of the people of the city. I very much look forward to that.
All right, thank you, Michael. And next up is Steve.
Well, it's a tough choice between rent stabilization and TOPA. I think we've set up a lot of housing action for the first year of the next term, and I hope that all of that comes through. I'm going to focus on TOPA because there has been such a, speaking of coalitions and speaking of people coming together to really work on a policy, TOPA has been a long haul effort with a lot of really persistent work from a lot of community partners who are invested in seeing TOPA pass into policy. And I think that it's been frustrating to watch, you know, in this case, how slowly the gears of governance have been kind of grinding towards getting to a TOPA policy. We've really been, you know, fighting an uphill battle to get, there's been a lot of barriers to getting it done, and we've kept it moving. We've kept it moving at least partially because of the energy of a whole lot of community partners who have organized to make it happen. And I am concerned as we come out of eviction protections and as we come out of some of the mortgage supports at the federal level that have supported people through parts of the pandemic, that we may start to see property sales and a vulnerability. That means we really need to get TOPA done right away. That I think there's going to be opportunities where property owners are giving up their properties, have fallen behind, where there's going to be a moment, hopefully we can get it done in time, where there are a lot of properties that we could save and that we could preserve as affordable if we're able to act in time. So that one for me feels urgent. It's something that I think probably won't happen until very early next term, but we're going to do everything we can to queue it up so it is ready to pass. And I think it's very important that we get that done. And I'm looking forward to it.
All right, thank you, Steve. And last on this question is Hope.
Yes, well, in the current climate right now, my top priority would be protections against evictions. I think that's something that the protections against that are expiring soon on the federal level. So I think there's more we need to do for our city of Minneapolis to protect against that. Unfortunately, I understand why landlords take that path, but it doesn't really solve that problem because they're also not getting money from that tenant as they're desperate to fill that apartment anyway, and now that tenant is out on the street. And the first thing that they're doing is trying to provide for their family or themselves. They are not going to be in a rush to pay back that landlord anyway. So I think that we need to come together as a community and find a better solution to this. So part of that, I think we need to spread more awareness about the Minnesota Rent Fund. I know there's millions set aside to help that people can apply for that funding to catch up on their past due rent. I think that is a great opportunity to help people, as well as sending that information out to landlords. So maybe they can not necessarily apply on tenants' behalf, but at least share that with their tenants, because ultimately I feel that they probably just want to get their money. So let's find a way to make that happen, because we obviously don't want landlords to lose their mortgages or anything like that either. That in tandem with the vacancy control policy that we've kind of spoke about, I think is another excellent opportunity to make sure that we don't have landlords pushing for their tenants to get out, trying not to renew leases just so they can jack up those rent prices. If we remove that kind of pressure, I think we have an opportunity to try to keep people in their homes as long as possible until they're ready to buy or ready to move out. So thank you.
Thank you, Hope. All right, another question from the audience coming in here, and Steve will be in line first for this one. And the attendee asks, are you concerned about the amount of short-term rentals in Minneapolis? I'm concerned it's hurting our housing stock, says the attendee.
I absolutely am concerned about it, and I did something about it. We passed an ordinance that I authored that places fairly strict limits on short-term rental properties in Minneapolis, and it's going to be one of the stricter policies around the country, not the strictest, but one of the strictest. And I think it's very important that we create those limits, because what was happening is it was distorting the housing market. It was legitimately distorting the housing market. There were, at any given time when we were looking in the data, between 1,100 and 1,500 units of housing being put on Airbnb or other short-term rental platforms. And that adds up to, at times, it was as much as 1.5% of our housing stock in the city. And so when we're talking about a vacancy rate, the difference for renters between a 3% vacancy rate, which means multiple applications for every house that anybody looks at, and people are competing for housing, and there's upward pressure on rents, versus a 4.5% vacancy rate, where that starts to ease the pressure and it starts to feel like you have choices and you can find something and you can negotiate your rent. That is significant in terms of who has leverage in the market, whether it's landlords or tenants. And so seeing that much of the housing market taken out of the housing market and put to some other use was distorting the market in a way that was never the intention of allowing short-term rentals to come in. That was pitched to the city as you should let people rent out a room in their house or rent out their apartment while they're on vacation. It wasn't, let's take housing full-time off the market and put it into the short-term rental market. So we passed a very strict ordinance. You can have your homesteaded property plus one other property. So you are allowed to still do short-term rental, but the people who are starting to get into a business model where they were buying up properties and taking them out of the housing market are going to find that Minneapolis just isn't a place to do that.
All right. Thank you, Steve. And next we have Hope on this question.
Sure, thank you. This is a great question. As we kind of touched on, like specifically with Airbnb and short-term rentals in that way, or other vacation rental companies, what they were intended to be used for is not the current place that we're in right now. It's not just people renting out a room or renting out a room above their garage or something like that. As we've seen, this can really damage because unfortunately, if landlords can't fill those, they can actually make more money by renting it out a couple weekends, and then that takes it off the market. So I do think that's great that we've addressed these policies and created new, more stricter restrictions on this. And I am in favor of revisiting that as well. Also, I think another aspect of this question is to talk about, well, how stressful moving is in general, and how we are watching new developments and landlords kind of create a situation where they're encouraging people to rent for maybe 8-10 months at a time by offering a certain kind of incentive that allows rent to be cheaper in the first 6 months. You know, come move into this place. You know, we have 2 months of free rent, and now it's actually affordable for the first 10 months, but now I can't re-sign a lease there because my rent has jumped from $1,100 to $1,600, making it not affordable. So in terms of short-term rentals that way, I'd like to see us work towards policies that eliminate that from happening, because we're not creating affordable housing if people just have to move and jump around every 10 months to find a new place. And then again, as we're watching landlords increase rent every time with that move. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Hope. And last on this question will be Michael.
Yes, so I don't think short-term rental is a problem anymore. As Steve said, there's been some pretty strict laws passed. No, unfortunately, they've hurt some people who own those buildings, and perhaps they should have been grandfathered in, but you know, that's a discussion for another day. I also think that the short-term rental business is going to die, or is dead, in this city because of the death of tourism and convention business. You know, we're not a hospitality city that we used to be. So that the city responded to that, and give them credit for it.
All right, thank you, Michael. We're going to move on to this next question, and I got to make sure I got 1, 2, 3. Hope will be up next on this one. And this is one that I was really hoping to get to because from the organization that I work for, Homeline, it's one of the top issues people call us about is the conditions of housing. And so the question is, do you think the city can improve upon its oversight of rental housing through regulatory services? Again, that's the department that oversees inspections of rentals. And if so, why and how? And if not, why not?
Yes, absolutely. I think there's a ton of room for improvement. I do think we need to increase that budget, and I do think we need to move forward with mandatory inspections of buildings. I personally went through an issue of having to try to withhold my rent and go to housing court, and the whole system just really isn't set up to help people get the resources they need if they are facing an issue with their rental property. The filing fee alone is $270. You're matched up with a mediator, but also, for instance, my property owner owns 31 properties and just sent a couple lawyers in to try to like mediate the process, and ultimately nothing became of it. They were given 30-60 days to deal with some things. They didn't, and I'm still waiting for an additional Zoom court date to follow up on that. And then of course, if you try to withhold your rent, the landlords actually just tack on fees after fees for those late fees. So I think the system is a little broken in that way. And it's certainly not it's certainly not easy to navigate if you are part of our like marginalized community or lower income community. And I do think there's a lot of opportunity for us to improve. And I do think it comes from funding that board where instead of the tenant having to advocate, you know, just for themselves or for their neighbors, or if they have the resource for it, that the city is stepping in and saying, like, we know this building is derelict. We know there are cockroaches. We know there isn't hot water because we've inspected it, because we're checking for even the regular things like smoke detectors and things like that, that landlords sometimes can not follow through on. So I do think we have an obligation to our tenants to ensure that we are checking those buildings. And I know it's not an easy task. I know we need more inspectors. I know we need more, you know, consistent funding and regulation for this. But I'm definitely ready to tackle that and do what we can to make sure that we're taking the right steps forward. So, thank you.
All right, thank you, Hope. And next up is Michael on this question.
Well, I do agree that our regulatory services have to be beefed up. I have friends and even neighbors who work in that division of the city, and they're not allowed the time to do the necessary inspections. We have to come to grips that we have two types of landlords and almost three, one in the middle. But we do have good landlords. There is a system where their properties aren't inspected as much. But we have bad landlords that are not taking care of that naturally affordable housing. So they need to be overlooked more, and it needs to be a privilege and an honor to be a landlord in this town. And to do that, you have to regulate them, and you have to do it at a much higher level than we currently are.
All right, thank you, Michael. And lastly, on this question, we have Steve.
So one of the things that really informed my desire to run in the first place was working as a community organizer. And I remember immediately after the tornado went through North Minneapolis, I knocked on someone's door and she invited me into her home, and her house had been knocked off the foundation. I mean, it was just at an angle. And she said, please don't tell the city, because she knew that if the city came, at that time, the response was going to be condemning the property, and we didn't really have an answer for where she would go next. That's not acceptable, and we have to do better. And it has gotten so much better this term. And I want to really shout out the staff and reg services, because we adopted a renter first policy that was really geared at making sure that they were oriented towards helping tenants when they showed up. That a lot of times what we found was that the city speaks in professionalized language that landlords learn, and they would come to do an inspection and they'd be talking over the tenants to the landlords, and a conversation would happen that wouldn't actually fix the problem, and people really felt lost. And so we have really implemented something, and they have embraced it. They've been doing trainings and really workshopping a new way of working. There was kind of a bifurcation between fire inspectors who inspected bigger buildings and inspectors who inspected smaller buildings. They're all working together now, so you don't get a "you called the wrong inspector" kind of an answer. We're all working together. And we're working now on passing right to counsel to make sure that if things escalate to the court system, if you have to advocate for yourself in that space, we know that the outcomes are dramatically different if tenants have counsel. And that's actually, you're going to see notice of introduction on that in this upcoming council cycle. So I think we're making a lot of progress. Things are getting better. The combination of a hiring freeze and a pandemic didn't make it as visible as we would have liked it to be, but reg services staff are doing great work, and we need to encourage that momentum.
Right, thank you, Steve. And lastly, we have Hope on this question.
Sorry, I think I started this question.
Apologies.
No, thank you.
All right. I already changed the order here in my notes ahead of things. So we're done with that question. Everybody answered that? All right. Apologies there. Okay, next question. Let's see here. We got about 13 minutes, so I think we got time for maybe two. We'll see. So this next question we're going to ask, and it'll go to Michael first. As city council member, what would you do to preserve and expand homeownership for households of color and first-time home buyers?
So I would really put a lot of effort into that, because I think there should be a first generational, first home type buyer programs with funding from the city for that. I think that, and whether it's a single family home, a duplex, a small apartment building, or even condos. I think the City of Lakes City of Lakes Housing Land Trust, getting tired, it's late in the day. You know, Jeff Washburn's a genius. We need to fund him more. We need to get people owning things and have that intergenerational wealth. That's my biggest desire, is just for a parent or a grandparent to be able to transfer that wealth into the next generation. That's the beauty of home ownership. Instead of paying a landlord rent every month, you should be paying yourself by owning property. And I would turn over every single rock available to find the money to do that, and to reach out to people like Kura and Jeff Washburn for that expertise on how to do that. We should be a leader in Minneapolis, a leader for the nation in developing home ownership for the BIPOC community.
All right, thank you, Michael. And next up is Steve.
You know, again, tenant opportunity to purchase is really, I think, the place that we can make the biggest intervention here, because we know, and as I think we've all discussed, the people who are in housing that has been ownership housing during the foreclosure crisis ended up being purchased by corporate purchasers and becoming rental property. The next time it turns over, if there's an opportunity for people to stay in those homes, those are the homes that are best suited for preservation, sort of tenant opportunity to purchase work and to help people qualify. We do really good, you know, mortgage trainings. We do good mortgage assistance work. There is only so much housing stock that is going to help people make the jump into ownership. And if we can help some of the housing stock that has slipped into the rental market get back into an owner-occupier's hands, that's going to be really helpful. So for me, I think tenant opportunity to purchase, and then continuing to work on moving the land trust model into multifamily, I think is going to be really, really important. As we build housing, you know, condos and townhomes are going to become a big part of what it means to own a home in a dense city. And we need to make sure that we have land trust models and affordability models that get people entry-level opportunities into multifamily housing. Because that's really what's going to be affordable as land becomes more scarce, and as the premium on single family homes continues to go up and up and up, as it has for decades.
All right, thank you, Steve. And last on this question is Hope.
Thank you. Yes. Well, this is an incredibly important question, and we do need to do more to make sure that our BIPOC and underrepresented community members have access to homes. I do want to echo, and it's already been said, but TOPA is so important, not only because it protects the right for tenants to own, but also because it provides technical services as well. What I hear from so many community members is that they struggle with the paperwork, the loan application, and oftentimes being discriminated against based off antiquated things like credit scores or what their particular work is, independent contractors, things like that. So what I think our city can do better is provide these technical services as well. Maybe like a one-stop shop where we could do a public partnership bank. So we can help regulate and say you are able to purchase this home because we can see that your mortgage is actually going to be cheaper than your rent, yet somehow a bank won't approve you for that. So that's where I think we need to step in and offer those regulation services as well. Also, making sure that all of these resources and technical applications and things like that are translated into other languages. Making sure that we can staff people that can help answer those questions outside of English, outside of, you know, the white community. Something that I think our city is working towards, but something that I think we definitely need to all remember to focus on, something I know that I want to do my part and focus on that as well. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Hope. All right, given what time it is, I think before I read this next question, I'm going to just give you a heads up that we're planning to have this be our last question for the evening. So I invite the candidates to please include any final statements in your 2-minute response to this question, if you can, please. Thank you. And the order on this last one is Steve first. So the drum roll, please. Last question. What is your position on maintaining a dedicated source of annual funding to produce and preserve affordable and accessible housing for residents of the city.
Thank you for that question. I absolutely support creating a dedicated source. We have created the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, as a mechanism to create accountability for the city over that. I think that there are ways that we can create more dedicated funding. Particularly, I've talked about using the levy authority of the MPHA to make sure that there's a stream that really is just going to public housing. And so I think there are ways that we can improve the specificity of dedicated funding, but we have been very clear about carving out a significant amount of money for affordable housing. We need to continue to do that and continue to grow it. I think that's very, very important. I think we've also used inclusionary zoning in a little bit that way, where we're getting affordable units as a contribution that developers make to our housing stock as a part of getting the approvals to build multifamily housing. And that's a kind of dedicated funding, although it doesn't come from us. That's actually something that we've imposed as part of the cost of doing business in the city. And I think it's absolutely the right thing to do to make sure we maintain economic diversity in even at the building level and especially at the neighborhood level. And so, yeah, I think continuing to set aside funds in a very intentional and deliberate way that we're very accountable for is critical to showing that this is really the most important issue in our budget in many ways. When we look at people sleeping in tents in parks, we need to hold ourselves very accountable to making sure that we're putting money aside and creating a reliable funding stream for this work. And I want to thank everybody who's put together this forum and who has been part of the coalition pushing us to keep funding affordable housing. We've got a lot of work to continue doing together, and I'm looking forward to continuing that work. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Steve. And next we have Hope.
Thank you. Yes. Well, in terms of budgeting and ensuring that we continue to fund these programs, yes, to continue to funding at the level that we're at right now, if not more, for affordable housing programs, including continually funding the 4D affordable housing incentive. It continued to apply for grants and look into the best ways that we can use federal funding for this as well. LHIA is a great example. And again, looking into our other grassroots or other independent nonprofit organizations here that we have in the city that we can partner with, use their models, make sure that they have the funding they need because they might have other avenue routes of donors or federal funding that they have access to as well. And yeah, thank you so much for having me here tonight. This was my first forum, so it was a pleasure to meet the other candidates. It was a pleasure to be here tonight and learn and listen from our community members, because there's so much potential here and so much that we can do to better our city. And I'm grateful to be a part of it. I'm excited to see what we can do in the future. So thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, Hope. And last on this question is Michael.
Well, thank you, Eric, and thank you to Julia and everybody behind the scenes who's helped put this together. This has been great, and we need to have more discussions like this. Housing is so important. It's actually the second most important issue when I go out and door knock, public safety being the first. But housing is right up there. And I just look at my own life, why I'm have a degree of success. And it's because of stable housing that I've entered into. I worked 2 jobs until I was 40 years old to be able to afford to buy a house. And that's had a great impact on me. As I've seen the need for renters, that's really impacted me as well. I do see housing again as a utility, just as we would look at water or electricity or gas. So we should start thinking of that housing as a right. To dedicate funding, I would be really interested in listening to the viewers or the constituents, what that could look like. I do think our city has really gone above and beyond to date. Of course, we can always do more. As we grow our city, we can add more dollars, but it's the best dedicated funding is a good council member that shows their values in the budgeting process. And that's what I'll be. I really understand the need for housing. I've lived it in my neighborhood in Northeast. I've seen the good results and the bad results. And we need to help out our sisters and brothers who just don't have the ability to house themselves, whether it's people that are unsheltered or just struggling to make those rents. Perhaps what we really need to be looking in as a short-term effort is to subsidize rents and help people afford the homes if they don't have the income. There's some really innovative ways, and that's going to come from the community. And I will listen to the community. I will be the voice of reason as we move forward. So thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much, Michael, and more broadly, thank you all candidates for participating in our event today. We really think it's important that voters hear directly from you about the issues that matter, and we're extremely grateful for your time and willingness to talk about affordable housing in our city. I think we've learned a lot about your perspectives, so I really appreciate your time, taking your time this evening. And for folks who've attended the event, again, thank you for joining us this evening. If you have other questions related to affordable housing, you can contact candidates through the information they shared earlier this evening. And please follow Make Homes Happen on Facebook, as we will be sharing a recording of today's forum on our Facebook page. Julia is sharing a link to the Facebook page in the chat. So you can check that, and you can also check that for other upcoming forums in other wards and eventually the mayoral forum. So again, thank you all. Thank you to the candidates, and thank you to folks who've joined us today. And please have a good evening. Thank you.